Hello and welcome. So there I was just sitting around thinking about life, but then it hit me. Ubisoft was releasing their new quadruple A pirate game today. Very cool. And yes, to nobody's surprise, it turned out that Ubisoft's new quadruple A game is a true masterpiece, with both the reviewers and regular ass gamers absolutely loving it. I'm just kidding, it sucks. But it got me thinking, where are all the great pirate games at? The pirate theme is so very cool, and yet it barely seems like developers are willing to make a pirate themed game. Which is a shame, because I think a third-person action open-world pirate game would absolutely slap. Every year we seem to get a medieval fantasy game, and yes, I can't lie and pretend I don't like medieval fantasy games because, well, I do. How my most anticipated game of this year is Dragon's Dogma 2, which perfectly falls into that category of games. However, my point is that I think there are a lot of genres or themes that modern developers seem to ignore, and one of these themes is the pirate theme. So I decided to pick up 6 pirate games and play them to answer a simple question: do we need more pirate games? First up is Sea Dogs Caribbean Tales, a game released in 2006. Now visually, Sea Dogs looks okay, it's not bad, especially for its time. It also has a cool intro cutscene that will change depending on the character that you choose, which is cool, I guess. Look, I'm looking for good things to say about this game, because this game is not very good. To start off with, this game just throws you into the world, which could be a good thing, but it gives you no real direction. I started talking to people and gathering quests, but these quests don't give you any clue as to where to start or how you should start. Again, the idea of being thrown into an open world is good, especially with modern games that love to hold the player's hand and constantly tell you how to do shit with tutorials popping up every few seconds. But if you're going to throw a player into a world, there has to be some sense of direction. A game like Morrowind is a perfect example of a game that just throws you into the world while still giving you the bare minimum guidance to help the player reach their goals. Furthermore, the combat is, well, just look at it. It's extremely stiff and feels horrible. Also, the enemies seem to sometimes forget that they are actually fighting and just stand around doing nothing. The ship combat is way worse. Half of the time I didn't even know where I was shooting at, as the aiming didn't seem to work. However, the biggest sin this game has is that it is way too slow, making it boring and tedious. Traveling from one location to another is boring. You will come across random encounters out at sea, which I couldn't flee from for some reason, leaving me to engage in combat, which is boring. So instead, I tried to manually flee from these encounters, which, well, it takes forever. Oh yeah, and one more thing, the menus. Opening a menu in this game is absolutely terrible. Just have a look at this menus. It's so over the top. I am no UI expert, but I can tell you looking at these menus makes my eyes dizzy. Now looking at Sea Dogs Caribbean Tales, this game seems to have everything in it that I would want from a pirate game. However, it is very slow, making it boring and tedious. It also doesn't help that the game doesn't hold up at all in nearly any of its departments, so overall Sea Dogs is just kind of meh. It's a meh out of 10. Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End is a game which should not be confused with the Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, the movie, nor with Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which is a different game that looks very similar but also looks way better at the same time and is seemingly not on PC. Now, most games based on movies generally are not very good, and this one is no different. The first thing about this game I notice is that it is called Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which is the third Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And given that this game's levels is loosely based on the movies, you would expect all the levels to be from At World's End, but it's not, as the first few levels of this game is from the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Why did they do this? I'm not sure, but maybe the naming department should have done a better job at naming this game. Okay, so is this game any good? Well, no, not at all. I mean, just look at this game. It looks terrible even for a game that came out in 2007, and unfortunately it plays even worse. The combat feels floaty and it's just not fun at all. You also have a secondary weapon that exists, and you can parry enemies off of cliffs, which is probably the only cool thing about this game. As for the levels, these feel more like mini games rather than actual well-designed levels. They are very simplistic and very bland. The characters' controls are somewhat stiff, and the voice acting and animations are, well, they are very terrible. There is not much I have to say about this game. It's not very good. It's a simple game that doesn't have very deep mechanics in any of its departments, and yet still manages to get the little it offers wrong. So overall, this game is a world turner getting stabbed in the heart out of 10, which is bad. Risen is a pirate game that starts off in space. Okay, maybe it's not a pirate game. No, it's definitely a pirate game. Oh, is it? This is yet another pirate game that looks terrible for its time. The animations are stiff and awkward, and the character models look absolutely hideous. The environments, however, look decent. I kind of like it, but it's not going to blow your socks off. It's just okay. The combat of this game is terrible. It's very stiff, very awkward, and it feels horrible. This game has a dodge at least, but it doesn't help the combat feel any better. Most of the enemies have the same movesets, which is basically a dodge away from the player and an attack, and this dodge is very annoying. This is one of those games where it feels like the enemies are trying to run away from the player rather than actually fighting. This gets way worse when you're fighting a group of enemies, as the enemies you are targeting can just run away from you while the others take cheap shots at you. Now, I mentioned that Sea Dogs just kind of throws the player into the world and expects you to get on with it. Well, this game does kind of the same thing, but just way better, and I appreciate it. There are very little tutorials, leaving the player to figure stuff out all by themselves, which is something that I really like. Now, once I got on with it, I quickly realized that this game is not the complete pirate experience. Hell, you can't even swim in this game, which is weird for a pirate game. And that brings me to my next point. The game doesn't really feel like a pirate game at all. It feels more like a fantasy game with some piratey elements sprinkled around. Most of the enemies in this game don't really feel like they fit in a pirate game. There's goblins and giant moths and swamp monsters. It doesn't really feel very piratey most of the time. I think the game can best be described as a game where you play as a pirate in a fantasy kind of piratey world. Oh yeah, and I have to mention the Oblivion style dialogue in this game, which is absolutely beautiful. Now, with all of this said, this game is an RPG, and a pretty decent one at that. It has all the elements of an RPG, of which some of these elements feel pretty well implemented. I'm not going to claim that this game is a good RPG. After all, it came out only a few months before Fallout New Vegas, which is one of the greatest RPGs of all time. But Risen is a game that has a lot of potential to be great. As a pirate game, Risen is not anywhere near the complete pirate experience, but as a regular RPG, Risen is pretty much okay and has a lot of potential. So I'll give this game a 6 goblins in a pirate game out of 10. What can I say about Assassin's Creed Black Flag that hasn't already been said? This game is fantastic, the story is interesting and captivating, the characters are all great, the combat is amazing, the world is beautiful and still visually holds up to this day. And yes, Assassin's Creed Black Flag holds up in almost all its departments. The writing, the cutscenes are fantastic, the combat and overall experience of Assassin's Creed Black Flag is way better than any of the last 4 Assassin's Creed games. However, this video is about pirate games, so I'll be focusing on the pirating aspects of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. So, is Assassin's Creed Black Flag a good pirate experience? Well, yes, it's fantastic. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is the best pirate experience out there right now, which is kind of a shame given that this game is nearly 11 years old and yet there has not been a pirate game that comes anywhere close to this. Yes, this game is essentially everything a pirate game should be. You have a combat system that feels great and fits with the pirating theme, awesome ship battles that are fantastic, the ability to pimp your ship, and of course the pirate characters that help the game feel authentic. The world and the locations you visit also look fantastic and does a very good job at creating the pirate vibes, as opposed to something like Risen, which kind of fails in that department. And yes, it is an Assassin's Creed game, so of course you have stealth abilities and a story that is focused on the Assassin's Creed stuff, but it's what you should expect from an Assassin's Creed game. So overall, Assassin's Creed Black Flag is the pirating experience, and therefore I am giving it a real 10 out of good. So I mentioned that Risen had a lot of potential, so I skipped the second game and went straight to the third, hoping that the devs actually cooked and delivered a better overall experience. Now this game is way better at the whole pirating theme than the first game was. The characters look like pirates, you start off on a pirate ship, and the enemies actually look like they fit in a pirate themed game. Also, right from the start, it was very easy for me to notice the quality of life changes that makes a huge difference. But this is about all the good things I have to say about this game, because this game is way worse than the first one in every way possible. First off is the combat, which is basically the same as the first games, except way worse. Yeah, despite the player and enemies animations being the exact same as it was in the first game, Risen 3's felt way more frustrating. I'm not completely sure why, but it seems that the enemies are way faster than they were in the first game, making it way easier for them to attack the player and harder for the player to attack them. Also, I mentioned that the enemies seem to be more suitable for a pirate game. Well, I soon realized that this game has a whole bunch of weird enemies in it, just like the first game. The dialogue in this game is just as stiff and awkward as it was in the first game, and the story seems to be more ridiculous than the first game's story ever was. Visually, it's not much of an improvement from the first game and looks extremely outdated for a game that came out in 2014. Also, there are other weird things that happen with the visuals, like the depth of field that just doesn't seem to work properly. And I think the visuals sum up the whole game perfectly. Risen 3 is a slight update from Risen 1, with a lot of elements being way worse in this game than it was in the first one. Given that this is the third game in the franchise, I think it's terrible that there are so little improvements overall to this game. And with all of that said, overall Risen 3 is a pile of glowing spider dung out of 10. Pillars of Eternity 2 is a game I didn't even know was a pirate game. Now this game starts off slow. It starts off with a massive exposition dump. Then you slowly walk around for a few minutes and then finally create a character and get started. Now, as you can tell, this game is a isometric CRPG, which means by that very fact alone, a lot of people will probably not even bother playing this game. And I'm just going to say this up front, I am not the biggest fan of top-down isometric games. That being said, let's get into the finer details of this game. The combat in this game is okay. You click on enemies and your party members will start attacking them. There are different classes that all have unique movesets that make the game feel a little bit more deeper, but overall the combat just kind of feels okay. Now there's also a whole lot of dialogue and choices which you should expect from a game like this, and there are proper voice acting for seemingly all of the lines in this game as well, which is pretty cool. The characters you can recruit for your party has their own unique personalities as well, which helps them stand out from one another, and the choices you can make in this game actually seem to have consequences. Now this game encourages exploration, however the exploration mainly looks like this. The environments and visuals are both really good, and it really helps the game feel very piratey. You can also travel around in your ship, which surprisingly looks very similar to the exploration in Sea Dogs. And much like Sea Dogs, you will come across random ship encounters that you can engage with. Now these battles absolutely suck, as it's a turn-based minigame that you play by picking a line of text and hoping something cool happens. It's very stupid. So when it came to ship battles, I preferred to board a ship rather than engaging with combat. Okay, so where do I stand with this game? Well, I can tell you it's definitely no Baldur's Gate 3, but it's the best game after Assassin's Creed Black Flag in this video. And yes, I don't think that this is the typical style of game that most people would want to play, and that includes me. But it's a very good game, and if these types of games appeal to you, I highly recommend you give this one a try. So Pillars of Eternity 2 is getting an epic pirate theme song out of 10. Now, to the keen observer, it is obvious that the games I focus on in this video were single player experiences, which is why I didn't include any live service games like Sea of Thieves. The reason I focused on single player games is because I think there is a large demand for single player pirate experiences. And yes, I am very aware that there are more pirate games out there. I mentioned Risen 2, and the Sea Dogs franchise has a bunch of other games in it as well. But I don't think the inclusion of these games would have made much a difference to my overall conclusion of this video, which is we need more pirate games. I think the type of pirate games that people will enjoy are third-person open-world games, similar to Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and yes, the idea of Risen is a pretty cool one. Mixing the themes of fantasy and pirates together is a very solid idea, but I think the fantasy element still has to be in line with the pirate theme overall, like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So the answer to the question, do we need more pirate games, is yes, we absolutely do. So to all the devs out there, get on it. Anyway, that is all I have for today. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thank you very much for watching, and bye bye.